Hello everyone, what is up? I'm Ewan from What Culture Comics again, joined by Zoe.
Continue to be Zoe.
Yes, exactly. And we're here today to talk about Event Leviathan because yesterday was new comic book day, and out of all the releases that kind of came out yesterday, the biggest of the bunch was Event Leviathan, or the second issue. And we thought we'd kind of go into it because Brian Michael Bendis, the writer behind the comic, has promised that we'll be able to decipher who is the big bad behind the whole big bad Leviathan business before the actual arc concludes. And we being expert detectives here at What Culture, we thought that we'd try our hand at figuring out and uncovering the thing. I did plan on having a massive question conspiracy board behind us with different bits of string, but then I didn't because I'm really bad. But anyway, for those who don't know about Event Leviathan, it's basically been building since Action Comics. Bendis has been handling the Superman titles since late last year, wasn't it, when he kind of came on board?
Around then.
And so Leviathan is all about that. They've basically taken over an organization which was previously run by Talia al Ghul. If you remember Batman Incorporated, Leviathan was the big kind of bad of that. So it's been taken over by a figure called Leviathan, who is now running Leviathan, and they have taken down the DEO, Spiral, and Argus, and basically every single, clandestine spy organization in the DC universe. And they're recruiting from the DC hero community as well. They approached Batgirl, and obviously she was kidnapped at the end of the last issue. And things are really hotting up in the second issue. It's still kind of going at a slow pace, but I'm really, really enjoying it. And basically what's happened here is that Lois Lane has assembled a team of the world's greatest detectives.
And Plastic Man.
And Plastic Man. Not Elongated Man randomly, because Elongated Man is definitely the detective, isn't he? And not Plastic Man. Yeah.
That's why I find it suspicious.
We'll overlook that, Bendis. But yeah, Batman, The Question, Green Arrow, basically, and Kate Spencer's Manhunter as well. Like, there's an amazing team that they've got coming together to try and solve this mystery. And it's Bendis and Alex Maleev back together again. It is so good. Before we get into the more detailed theories, I did want to ask you, what are your thoughts on the series so far?
Well, I think the reason it feels slow, in all fairness, is because it's 2 issues long thus far. And for 2 issues, it's a crazy amount that we've actually learned. And the amount of conspiracy theories that are around now, especially on Reddit, I see you, is absolutely insane. I think pretty much every DC character in existence, people have been like, maybe it's
Maybe.
them. And I mean, I can't really sass too much because we've done exactly that for basically since it came out. So
Yes.
that's the way it goes, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm really liking the way that Bendis and Maleev just are building this mystery through kind of different bits of dialogue, and just it's still character driven, but this big grand overarching plan that's at play. So issue 1 basically focused on Batman and Lois Lane at the aftermath of a Leviathan attack, and I think it was on the Argus facility. I can't remember what it was. I think it was Argus.
Argus.
Yeah. So they basically kind of see there, and they look at the aftermath, and they're investigating the crime scene and decide that they need to basically assemble this team of teams, as it were, to try and track down what Leviathan is doing and who is behind it all. And so the second issue actually picks up with Batman with Jason Todd in his really weird new design. I have to admit, it's not working for me. It's like, Jason, you're a grown man now. Stop carrying around that bloody crowbar.
He's gonna rip his sleeves off. He's the edge you want.
Yeah.
Right? I think it was clearly done to make him look like Leviathan, but also you didn't necessarily need to make him look like Leviathan because he did have motives initially that would make you, especially all that stuff where he was like, I come from a broken world. And it's like, what's that?
So basically, here's the issue. And the first we kind of meet up with Batman and Jason Todd on the rooftop. And we think at first that Batman is bringing Jason up to speed on what's going on because, as the Red Hood, he's actually looking at a recent Leviathan attack. And we then get treated to a conspiracy board where we actually see that Damian Wayne has kind of fingered Red Hood as enemies, enemy suspect number 1, public enemy number 1 rather. And we kind of basically get treated to what's happened in between issue 1 and issue 2. Batman reveals that the Question has gone to Sam Lane's hospital room because he's survived a Leviathan assassination attempt. And basically, he then gets into a scuffle with an operative of Leviathan. And that is one of the coolest things because it's like that's the first time the organization has kind of really come out of the shadows, as it were, and we've kind of come face to face with one of them. And so it kind of falls to in the scuffle, basically the Leviathan operative gets killed by Sam Lane from his bedside, which is really, really cool. And then it falls to Plastic Man to recover the body, which is where he comes face to face with Leviathan himself. And we get some interesting clues about what kind of is the overall, long-term strategy here, because Leviathan seems keen on recruiting Plastic Man in that initial scene. It's very much like join the dark side and together we can rule the galaxy like father and son, which prompts Patrick to go, "Are you my mother, my alternate dimension mother," or something like that. So I don't know. It's really interesting. Yeah, he lists off loads of interesting information during that exchange, like all of the past teams that Plastic Man's been a part of. Like he mentions the Justice League, the All-Star Squadron, Secret Six, the Terrifics, the FBI, and CBR actually noted that loads of those teams he hasn't actually been on them in current DC continuity, which might imply a link to the multiverse.
Casual, sneaky multiverse.
Yeah, it's just really interesting. And then the issue kind of basically ends with the whole twist that Batman was really stalling for time and that he was waiting for the rest of the detectives to come up and basically ambush Jason Todd, kind of like the Avengers do at the start of Endgame, just kind of catch him while he's just chilling and then just go to town on him. But then it kind of ends with Jason as, the prime suspect, but it seems too early on for him to be revealed as the main culprit. I think we're all agreeing right now.
He also seems pretty... a mixture of unsurprised and disappointed. Like, you'd think he would be like, join me, Dad, but he's just like, are we doing this again? Have you just put me as suspect number one? Because, we had that whole, yeah, I know I died, Dad. Like,
I love that exchange so much because he's just so done with everything. And like, he's just like, Green Arrow, you're here too. And he's like, yeah. And then the bit where he's like, and who are you? And it's Manhunter. And she doesn't say anything. He's like, cool, yeah. Bendis' dialogue at its best, I think.
It really is some good work because you can really see the characterization of like a Red Hood who's no longer quite got that edge, but is still at the point where he's like, could we just not suspect me for every possible? Because he does seem quite excited to potentially join the detective team with his dad. But the minute he realizes, oh, you haven't invited me to the detective team, you've brought the detective team to investigate me. You can just see sort of, you don't need to see his face. You can just tell he's like, I'm going to go.
Again,
you guys do some
really
work.
Yeah, it's interesting as well because there is a clear, line of logic that Damian uses to kind of go back to Jason Todd. He mentions that the unpredictable nature of Leviathan kind of speaks to Jason's thing. The connection to Talia is interesting as well because obviously in this continuity, Jason wasn't resurrected by the Superboy Prime Punch, but rather the Lazarus Pit. So there's already a connection there. And, as the Red Hood, he's been involved with all these clandestine organizations before. So the Batman link is something that I'm really curious about because earlier on in the issue, when the question is actually in Sam Lane's kind of room, the police officers stationed outside and the janitor, they kind of basically succumb to a fit of the giggles and what looks to be some Joker gas that's been used.
It's definitely suspicious.
Yeah, and that was really, really interesting because I love that scene. Like the way the question is just, I don't know if you can see here, but the way the question is just kind of like stood around and like his expression, you can tell that maybe he's like kind of just been like, oh God, underneath the mask, but like he's just so calm outside of it. And basically the lettering all changes to when people kind of succumb to Joker gas. And then when we get a view of the outside room, it doesn't look, we can't see any smiles on their faces or whatever, but we basically learn that the Leviathan operative who's done that is a guy called Casey Kleber, who you said appeared in...
He's from Justice League Vibe,
yeah,
which is interesting because that comic has never been referenced in anything since it happened. I had practically forgotten it existed until I was like, isn't that guy? Don't I know that guy? It's really interesting because Casey worked for Argus. Mm-hmm. So obviously, it's not just that Batgirl got taken, it's that they're continually taking from these organizations that have suspicious backgrounds and saying, hey, you had good ideas, why don't you come work for us? Because the first comic, I'm pretty sure, or otherwise Superman Leviathan Rising, contains him talking to a woman being like, you could work for us.
Yeah. And like Batman mentions that it's a pseudonym, which kind of raises interesting implications as well, that maybe Casey Kleber has something else to him apart from maybe that whole that experience with Argus. Maybe his roots go further back potentially. I don't know. It's one of those things that I find really interesting because we're completely in the dark on this. Like we have no way. We're kind of, Bendis has said that we can try and figure this out for themselves, and that's why we're here to try and figure it out. But it's one of those interesting things is that we still have no idea. And like the Batman link at the moment is the thing that's most interesting because the Joker gas that kind of, what I'm assuming is Joker gas at least, that gets used, that implies, again, a link to that surrounding area. Anyone who's related to Batman tends to be really, really smart as well. And then you have basically one of the reasons why they kind of accuse Jason at the end, as you know, is when they kind of have the the piece of armor lifted off of Casey's kind of costume, and they think that that's actually kind of from Bat Tech. So that kind of is what leads them to Jason in the first place. And it's one of those things where I think, well, maybe it is a Batman. Like, maybe it is someone related
Maybe
to
it's
Batman.
a Bat Boy.
Maybe it is a Bat Boy. I don't know. I've not been keeping up with what's going on with Rick Grayson.
Some stuff. Would
Some
be,
stuff.
Would be the answer.
But that would make sense as well, because I after getting shot in the head, that does things to
It's been
people.
a rough day. Also, I mean, he was involved in the Dark Multiverse stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So if it is a multiverse way,
Yeah.
there's a pretty interesting in through that.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I'm trying to like. I think that would be an interesting thing if they were to do it as another Batman sidekick, because you think of all these different organizations. The person who's behind Leviathan has to be well connected, has to have plenty of resources, and has to have experience with these organizations in the past. And obviously, when Dick Grayson stopped being Nightwing for the first time, he was an agent of Spiral, which in itself has also been kind of taken down in the Leviathan attacks. So to me, that implies that this person is familiar with these organizations anyway, and they're not an external force. They are fully aware of the different apparatuses that are going on, and maybe believe in the concept of an actual clandestine organization to achieve its own goals, which is, again, I know a lot of people would be really annoyed if it was Dick Grayson, but it's one of those things where it's like, you can't cross him off the list yet.
As long as it isn't another alternate universe Batman.
Yes.
I'm so sick of... but interestingly, obviously, when Batman speaks to Jason Todd, he's like, you've prepared for all of these scenarios. Why have you not seen this one?
Mm-hmm.
And as much as Batman blames himself, it's interesting to think, well, if it is Dick Grayson, who's the one person who knows the most of Batman's plans? It's probably Dick Grayson.
And it would kind of that would be an interesting bait and switch as well, because obviously Damian draws this conclusion to Jason off the back of the death of Roy Harper and all the crap that Jason has been going through. But maybe he is right about there being a Robin link. He's just after the wrong Robin.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have to think about the fact that Damian hates Jason and Tim and loves Richard. So there's no chance that he's going to be like, yeah, no, it's definitely the man who raised me for years while you weren't there.
That's a really good point as well, actually. And, we haven't even mentioned Tim Drake yet, because obviously in the future he becomes Batman, but he's a bit of a crazy Batman in the future.
He's got
some issues. So maybe this is what kind of seeds that downfall in a way, potentially. It's one of those things where, like, I kind of want it to be someone who's not part of the Bat family, so just for once. But I do think that's an interesting thing that they're already making connections. Then obviously there's also the possibility of there being, a double agent on the team. Like, I think it's Jason who mentions maybe it's Lois Lane, which would be, again, that would be really interesting. I wouldn't like that in light of what's going on in the Greg Rucka comic, because I really like Lois, doing her thing as a journalist. But again, that's an interesting thing that you can't necessarily disqualify straight away.
You can't let anyone off yet. And I mean, I don't think we've ever particularly seen an evil Lois Lane, not in like an Elseworld or something. So it'd be exciting to see someone who you've never really seen go evil just be like, well, not even evil. That's the weirdest part, is that it doesn't necessarily take a villain. It just takes someone who is sick of the current climate.
Yeah, exactly. And this is they refer to it as a revolution in the comic as well. So it's one of those things where, the methodology behind what they're doing is obviously very wrong, but they have a clear goal in mind. And it's interesting because in that exchange with Plastic Man, he mentioned, they mentioned that they know them, but not from the. There's a little interesting bait and switch they have where he says, like, I know you, and he's like, oh, where from? And he goes to Justice League, and then you think, oh, he's clearly the Justice League, but then he goes off to list all the different teams later on. I was so
hoping it'd be Elongated Man.
Yeah.
That would have been the funniest reveal.
Well, and he laughs at his joke as well, which implies that,
they're on
first. I was going to say they're on first name basis, maybe, because they seem. It just seems to kind of.
He seems very buddy with everyone that he's kidnapped and tried to kill.
And you raised a valid point that in a different issue he refers to Superman they refer to Superman as the alien.
Yeah, in Leviathan Rising, he only refers to Superman as the alien. He won't refer to him by name, which is really weird.
Yeah, because Lex Luthor does that. He uses the alien a lot.
Yeah, but then also he does a lot of Superman.
Yeah. It's interesting. I don't think it's Lex, because I think he's pretty busy doing his own thing at the moment.
His own evil. Well, also, I don't think Lex Luthor would do it so secretively. This is the man who, again, became president for kicks, essentially.
Yeah, I definitely think the clandestine link is the strongest thing so far, and maybe, again, the Batman link as well.
Yeah.
But again, like CBR mentioned in their article, which is really good, that the fact that he seems to be aware of past DC continuity. This could literally just be Bendis forgetting what is and what isn't continuity. He could be overthinking this massively, but it does seem deliberate, and that implies either someone who has been through past continuity. And the only person that I think who's done that is Wally West, and obviously he's off doing his own thing now. They can't make him the villain twice over, but we don't know anyone who would have that kind of meta knowledge of the different timelines.
We did discuss maybe Mr. Terrific, if only for the sense that he's the one guy who isn't Lex Luthor or Batman, who's smart enough to sort of have an understanding of all of this weird comic shenanigan stuff.
Mr. Terrific, I think currently is I think he's the most interesting shout for this, because in past DC continuity, I don't know if anyone's here has read Checkmate, which is a really good comic by Greg Rucka. I love Greg Rucka. Please, Greg Rucka, if you're listening, I love you. But basically, he's a part of Checkmate, and we've not really seen Checkmate in the new continuity, bar a brief appearance in OMAC during the New 52. And that would be an interesting thing, because he'd be familiar with all the different inner workings. If this version of Mr. Terrific is aware of what's going on beforehand, that would be interesting, because he mentions the Terrifics here as well. And I do wonder if that is maybe where they're going with this, because he's described as the third smartest man in the universe and in the world after Lex Luthor and Batman. And you think of what's going on here,
and it takes
a lot of brains.
Yeah. Yeah, and then obviously there's the Secret Rising theory that it might be Roy being brought back, which I think would be very interesting in that it would explain why Jason looks so suspicious, because it would be literally, I presume Jason wouldn't even know, so it would be not only interesting in seeing how Jason would react, but interesting in seeing sort of an unexpected character's rise and fall to darkness sort of thing.
It would make sense as well why Green Arrow is on the team. I don't want to knock Green Arrow. Green Arrow is like one of my favorite heroes of all time.
It was the first question I asked you, though. I was like, is he
a great detective? I mean, he solves mysteries.
He does, but they tend to be around why he's lost all his money.
Yes, yeah. So Green Arrow was an odd shout for me the first time around. Not that he isn't smart or a bad detective or anything, but just solely because I wouldn't really call him a detective on the first glance. And maybe the reason why Ollie is on the team is because Bendis can have a moment later on where Roy Harper is brought back and they do something with that.
There are so many fantastic potentials for it. But with the Mr. Terrific thing as well, interestingly, with the Year of the Villain stuff, he's been on a lot of the covers, which is weird because as far as I can remember, Mr. Terrific doesn't make covers very often. So I guess there's a good chance that they'll try and bring him back in like a clever way. And I can only think that him coming back as not quite a villain, not quite a hero, would be probably the most interesting way they could do that. Yeah,
I mean, the suspect list isn't exactly it's not exactly short. And it's one of those things where I honestly, Terrific, again, it's an interesting point because, we have the Talia link, we have the Batman link, and we have the secret organization link. And Jason fits all those pretty well because he has been basically here and around the block, but it's obviously not him.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those things where I'm just kind of like, well, maybe it is Dick Grayson then, because I could be completely making an ass of myself right now because I know he's Rick. I know he's Rick Grayson. I know there's all sorts of stuff going on there, but maybe that has triggered kind of like a different personality almost within Leviathan. It's just one of those things where I'm trying to think of who would have known Plastic Man on like a first name basis,
a good term, yeah.
Who has the motive, who has the knowledge, and who has the capability to do this sort of thing.
I think the interesting thing is technically everyone has the motive.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about pretty much every superhero conceivable, they've all had moments where they've sort of looked at the world around them and thought, like, why is this happening? So, as much as Dick Grayson is arguably the most heroic of the ex-Robins, there's still a very good chance, because it's not as though he hasn't had moments where he's been like, I'm out of this, I'm sick of this, I'm gonna go. So to have it in a way where he thinks, I don't want to quit, I still want to save people, but maybe saving people means not saving some people.
Yeah.
I think it would be a really interesting route to see him go down, because obviously, as much as we've seen brief glimpses of sort of his inner darkness, we've never had that full exploration of like how much he's been the most long-suffering character in the Batman universe.
Yeah, I think there's so much drama you could probably extrapolate from that as well. Like as you said with Damian, and then obviously with Bruce as well, constantly going to the problem middle child and not, to the oldest. It's more. again, it's one of those things where have no idea how this is going to proceed.
You have to figure out if you're coming up with a theory or writing fan fiction.
Yeah, I'm basically like getting a mini headache right now. But, that's the interesting. I love how it is an existing DC character. Invariably, it's going to piss people off because they're going to take someone who, is heroic and reveal that they've been doing not so heroic things all along. But I find that much better than it being, a character already created. I think, again, the fact that Jason Todd was revealed as the Arkham Knight only a few years ago, and I know that was in like a video game as well, I think that probably precludes him from being the actual suspect. We
can't just keep having him become evil. Because, the whole point is that he isn't really evil, but he isn't really a morally clear person either.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd have him be like, oh, look, I'm evil again. It seems like too easy of a play.
Yeah. I wonder if maybe Jason's going to go off and do his own investigation now, because obviously the comic opens it with him examining the crime scene. I wonder if there's going to be a different team of detectives that he assembles to try and figure out what's going on.
Team 2.
And again, it's one of those things where maybe there is a mole inside like this team. I mean, we've not seen much of Manhunter at all. She's kind of just basically silent.
Just been existing on
panel. And Manhunter might be an interesting shout as well, because obviously she was around quite heavily in the the late noughties and Detective Comics. She had like she had a great backup series of issues in Streets of Gotham. And we've not really seen her at all in current DC continuity. So maybe that would be the easy option. You have someone who you can introduce from the old continuity.
And just make them... Possibly.
Yeah.
I don't know, though, because one of the purposes of the Event Leviathan series is to sort of thin down the numbers of secret organizations there are.
Mm-hmm.
Because, even in this alone, like in the first 2 issues, we've been like, oh, yeah, there are like 5. And they all do roughly the same thing. So I think to bring in a character just to sort of wipe it away, it doesn't seem like the intention of it yet. So I have hope. I have hope that Manhunter will have a redemption arc.
I would like Manhunter to have a big role in this. Again, it's just one of those things. I have no idea how it's going to proceed, and I'm interested to see how, because they're not going to catch him immediately after. I know that for those who haven't read it, the last page of Event Leviathan 2 ends with, the detectives basically chasing after Jason as he kind of leaps off into the night.
As he shenanigans away.
Yeah, and it's one of those things I just don't know how it's going to continue.
That's the most exciting part.
Yeah.
Basically every issue of this is finished and I've been like, I've no idea. I've simply no idea.
It's kind of similar to Doomsday Clock in a way. Like I'm reading Doomsday Clock. I'm like, I have no idea how this, and I can theorize all I want. I have no idea how this is going to go next. And this is a very similar case, except it's like classic, almost Agatha Christie-esque in a sense.
It has a really different tone to a lot of the like mystery comics that we've seen so far. Because, like, it is one of those situations where, especially because of all the previously minor characters that are being brought in, like Casey, we have literally no idea who's going to be brought in and what their motives are. So it's, I'd say it's pretty close to perfect right now.
Who is your current favourite for the actual Leviathan identity?
I think Mr. Terrific would be really, really interesting. In as much as we haven't seen a lot of him recently. And it would make for a really interesting dynamic because he has that familiarity with everyone, but it won't be. So with Dick Grayson, it would be very Batman focused. If it was Roy Harper, it would be very Green Arrow focused. With this, it's just like everyone's upset, and that's what I'm after. Yeah,
Terrific is interesting again because you mentioned we kind of discussed that before we came in, and you mentioned about the childhood comment that.
Yeah. So obviously, Leviathan, when he confronts Plastic Man, talks about how they've both had a difficult past and how the world hasn't been kind to them.
Yeah, he says, you and I were born into a broken world and it almost killed us.
Yeah, so initially I was like, Mr. Terrific had a great childhood because he was like the smartest dude in every room. But obviously his brother died when he was 15. And I think it's supposed to be an event that really bothered him. So to see that sort of development of incredibly smart person, incredibly talented person, but person who, because of these skills, has become aware of like the cruelty of the world, it would make for a pretty interesting dynamic.
Yeah, it's just Terrific again. I think I'm kind of leaning towards him the most out of anyone. And I know that's bad because I've not really been keeping up with the Terrifics or what's going on with this. It's very difficult to actually get a full understanding of what's going on with this comic without consuming and being up to date with literally what every DC character is kind of getting up to at the moment. But Terrific to me, as one of the smartest people in the DC universe, as someone who has priors with Checkmate and loads of different clandestine organizations.
But was never super keen on them.
But was that, yeah, exactly. And that in itself kind of maybe helps him kind of stand out as maybe, you know, being a part of that. But again, that doesn't explain the multiverse link or how he's aware of what Plastic Man has been up to in the past.
You can't just say he's smart. That doesn't always.
And again, that's one of those things. I wonder if it is a pre-existing DC character, it'll probably be a good idea to, you know, rack our brains and go through the archives to find what's been going on with like classic, you know, issues of like Suicide Squad and, you know, Spiral, and like going all the way back and seeing who's been a part of Checkmate and these different organizations and figuring out who could be a different part. 'Cause I know Steve Trevor appeared earlier on, but he's definitely not a suspect as well.
Well, I found it really interesting. It may have just been to promote the new Superman's Friend Jimmy Olsen comic.
Which looks amazing, by the way.
Which does look really amazing. But also, it was particularly interesting that they chose the Superman crossover with Event Leviathan to introduce that.
Mm-hmm.
I have this secret theory. This may be some real tinfoil hats. The reason, because basically Superman gets kidnapped. Jimmy Olsen, who would be the first person to go and try and rescue him, is then he just wakes up in Gorilla Town, just completely no idea. I think it's someone who also knows Superman well enough to know that Jimmy Olsen would be the first person to go rescue him, which has some particularly interesting connotations as to who it might be.
That would maybe, again, make Lois an interesting...
It places some... Because, I mean, people... in the comic, it seems almost as though they keep saying, oh, it could be Lois. To be like, but it couldn't possibly be Lois.
Yeah.
But, I mean, if there's a multiverse...
Well, also... You know, she's a prime investor. We don't know what she got up to when she went away at the start of Action Comics. We still don't know what she got up to.
In a gap year.
And, you know, her relationship with her father hasn't always been on the best of terms.
It's not peachy. Yeah.
So, again, there is, you know... I think Lois being Leviathan would just be too much for me to take. I don't think I could.
It would be
I
a
don't
lot.
think I could deal with that.
Alternate universe, Lois Lane.
Yeah, and if it is someone who's resurrected it again, I think Roy Harper is an interesting idea, but I'd be miffed because I want
right off,
because it's like I want this person to be around. I want to feel as though I've definitely had all the tools in front of me to actually try and figure it out, but in the end I was too dumb to do it, which is probably going to be what happens when issue 6 comes around.
He's explicitly said, if Batman can't figure it out right now, don't beat yourself up too
Yeah,
much.
Exactly.
Which is a nice way to call us idiots.
I know. I mean, I can try really, really hard. To me, the biggest clues in this issue so far are the Joker gas. What I think is Joker gas anyway.
What we presume.
And the exchange he has with Plastic Man. And then kind of what happens at the end when they surround Jason, and Jason basically just looks like nonplussed by it all.
I'm so sick of this.
Yeah, like he does. I know he runs, but there's nothing in that exchange to me that makes it seem as though he is necessarily aware of what's happening in this situation. He's just running because he knows they're about to try and apprehend him. But maybe again that implies that the team is compromised, and that also lends itself to the idea of there being a double agent.
There's a whole lot, basically.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, you know, probably going to be here in a few weeks' time looking at it again and basically being like, what is going on?
Watch Mr. Terrific never even be mentioned again.
Watch him.
And we're just like, oops, oh well.
Yeah, it's interesting. That shot as well, I just looked at that there where Leviathan is holding up the dead body. It vaguely reminiscent of when Batman is holding Jason Todd in the rubble. It's not Jason. I know it's not Jason. There are loads of different subtle hints throughout the book that try and, you know, say, oh, it's Jason and stuff.
Well, if it was Jason, this would be 3 issues long, and the next comic would be one panel where it's just Jason saying, I did it. Like, that's as good as it would be.
Yeah. So, to conclude, we think this person has a link to Batman, a link to or at least a link to Batman's world. You know, there is stuff that has in common with Batman's designs. So they're either familiar with Batman's work, or they are familiar with Batman himself.
Oh, they're a fan, yeah.
Yeah. They've kind of been involved with Talia al Ghul in the past. They know of Plastic Man's past history, and they're definitely not Jason Todd. I think we can definitely say they're definitely not
Please, God,
Jason Todd.
Please tell me they're not Jason Todd.
Yeah. Oh, God. I again, one of those things, I want to know who it is soon.
It's very well crafted in a way that...
It's a brilliant mystery. Before we kind of wrap things up, I will just say that Event Leviathan, the way it's framing the mystery right now is fascinating.
Sublime. Well, I mean, in an industry right now where big events are the next thing, it's nice to have an event that is big, but not because everyone dies all the time.
And you have to pick up a billion Tyne comics to figure out what the hell's going on. I mean, it would help to have the extra knowledge to know of literally
we're going to do it, but that's because we're huge dorks, and not because you have to.
Exactly. And so those were our thoughts on Event Leviathan number 2. This is one that I'm really curious to hear you guys' thoughts down in the comments below of who you think actually is. Tell me if I'm chatting nonsense, because I would love to know. I'm kind of just like basically throwing whatever sticky substance I have at the wall and seeing if it sticks. Just throwing hope. But yeah, please let us know what you think or who you think Leviathan is down in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And head back on over to whatculture.com/comics for more stuff like this every day. As always, I've been Ewan. You can catch me on Twitter at Ewan Ruins Things. It is easy to pronounce. Don't tell me it isn't. And I've been joined by Zoe.
And for now, I'm Zoe Miskelly. Unless I'm not. And you can find me at Zemiskel on Twitter. That's also important.
I wish we had a really dramatic burn. But yeah, that was basically What Culture Comics Roundtable about Event Leviathan 2. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.